The wind blew gently in the quiet town of Louisville, Kentucky. The leaves of the trees fluttered softly as Jason Warner, a middle-aged man with a predictable routine, finished hammering a few nails into the deck of his newly purchased house. His muscles ached, but he smiled with satisfaction as he saw the progress. The house next door was in complete silence, which for Jason was always a good sign. His wife, Emily, was at her sister's house, adjusting some decorative details, or at least, that's what Jason believed. Jason's phone vibrated in the pocket of his jeans. He took off his dirty gloves and looked at the screen. David, his best friend, always eager to talk about the weekend football games, and Jason promptly answered. "Dude, I've got to tell you what I saw at the stadium yesterday. You won't believe it." David began, with his usual enthusiasm. Jason laughed, leaning against the wall as he listened to David's absurd story. But as he laughed, his attention was diverted by a shadow moving quickly past the window of the house next door, the one he and Emily were still renovating but had been empty for weeks. His brows furrowed. He knew no one should be in there. His laughter faded, and curiosity took over. "David, I've got to call you back later. Something strange happened here," Jason said, not waiting for a reply from his friend as he ended the call. Cautiously, he walked toward the back door of the house. His shoes made a faint sound on the damp grass, and he paused for a moment, listening. There was a faint whisper coming from inside, and his breathing quickened. Who could be in the house that was supposed to be empty? Jason took the keychain from his pocket and carefully unlocked the door. As he entered, the wooden floor creaked beneath his feet. The whispers grew clearer, muffled voices. His heart raced as he recognized the familiar voice. It was his wife, Emily. He walked down the hallway leading to the master bedroom, where the sounds were getting louder. Each step felt heavier than the last. Jason's mind was in chaos, struggling to process what was happening. And then, before reaching the slightly ajar door, he heard a sound that made the blood freeze in his veins. A man's laughter. Jason stopped, his eyes wide and his mind racing a mile a minute. He peeked through the crack in the door and saw something he never expected. Emily, in the arms of another man, quietly laughing as she kissed him. The sight hit him like a punch to the gut. He felt his body freeze, unable to move or speak. What should he do? Confront them? Shout? The silence dragged on as Jason remained hidden, his heart pounding, unable to believe what he was seeing. Jason stood paralyzed for a few seconds, his mind trying to absorb what his eyes were seeing. He couldn't believe it. Emily, his wife, in the arms of another man. That scene felt like a nightmare, something surreal that couldn't be happening in his life. The man was tall, with dark hair, a confident expression, and a smile that made Jason feel a mix of rage and humiliation. He watched as Emily laughed softly, a laugh Jason knew well, but now it felt bitter and distant. It was the same laugh she used to share in their intimate moments, moments he believed were only theirs. Jason took a few steps back, his heart pounding in his chest. His breathing was uneven, and he felt cold sweat trickling down his forehead. The adrenaline surged through his body, but something held him back from acting impulsively. He wanted to burst into that room and confront them, but he knew he needed to think clearly. Any move now could destroy everything. He hid behind the hallway wall, breathing deeply to calm his nerves. The muffled voices continued, and Jason could hear bits of a conversation that only heightened his anguish. "I told you today was risky," murmured Emily, her voice low and concerned. The man laughed again. "Relax, no one's going to find out. Jason's busy, right? He'll never know." Those words were like a knife stabbing Jason's chest. The betrayal wasn't just physical but emotional. The trust he had in Emily was quickly disintegrating. He had always believed their relationship was solid, based on love and respect. Now, everything seemed like a lie. Jason closed his eyes for a moment, trying to suppress the rising wave of anger inside him. He knew he couldn't confront them at that moment. Not there, not like that. He needed a plan, something that would allow him to learn more and, perhaps, turn the situation in his favor. With silent steps, he retreated to the back door, feeling every muscle in his body tense and ready to explode. As he left the house, he took a deep breath, the cold night air filling his lungs like a gust of reality. He looked at the house where he lived with Emily, the place where he believed they were building a life together, and now everything seemed to be crumbling. He didn't know what to do next, but he knew one thing: this betrayal would not go unpunished. Back in his own house, Jason sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by the silence of the night. His thoughts were racing, and he knew that before taking action, he needed to find out who that man was. Jason spent hours sitting at the kitchen table, his mind swirling in a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of Emily in another man's arms came crashing back with full force. He couldn't shake off the feeling of betrayal, the idea that the life he knew had been shattered right before his eyes. He needed answers, but more than that, he needed a plan. Jason wasn't the type of man to act on impulse, despite the intense anger consuming him. He had always been practical and careful, and now was no different. The clock on the wall showed midnight when he finally grabbed his phone. Taking a deep breath, he scrolled through his contact list. His finger hovered over David's name for a moment. David, his best friend, was impulsive, and the last thing Jason needed was someone pushing him toward a rash confrontation. He needed someone with a more rational approach. He decided to call someone else: Alex, his co-worker, a former private investigator who had left that career behind for a quieter life in real estate. The phone rang several times before Alex answered, his voice rough with fatigue. "Jason? What's up?" "It's late, man." Jason hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to explain the situation without sounding like a fool. But he knew Alex was the only person who could help him without judgment. "Alex, I need a favor," Jason began, his voice weaker than he'd hoped. "Something happened today, and I don't know what to do. I think Emily is cheating on me." There was a silence on the other end of the line, followed by a heavy sigh. "Are you sure about this?" Alex asked, his tone now more serious. "I saw it with my own eyes. They were in the house next door, together." Jason felt his stomach churn just by verbalizing the situation. Alex remained silent for a moment, clearly thinking. "Okay, I can help, but we need to do this the right way. No hasty confrontations. We need to find out who the guy is and what's going on. Do you know anything about him?" Jason shook his head, even though Alex couldn't see him. "Nothing. I've never seen him before." "All right, we'll start there," Alex responded. "I'll help you investigate this. But, Jason, you need to be prepared for whatever we find. It could be worse than you think." Jason knew Alex was right. He couldn't let his emotions take over. He had to be strategic, think long-term. The anger still burned inside him, but he would control it. "For now. I'm ready," Jason said, trying to sound more determined than he actually felt. Alex gave him some instructions. "Over the next few days, watch everything. See if she mentions his name or if they communicate in any way. Send me any details you find." Jason hung up the phone, feeling a slight sense of relief that he finally had a plan. But at the same time, a persistent tension gnawed at his nerves. He had no idea how far the betrayal went, and that left him in a position of vulnerability he had never experienced before. That night, Jason barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, images of Emily and the man flooded his mind. Every second without answers made him more impatient, but he knew he had to be cautious. The next morning, Jason acted as if nothing had happened. He and Emily shared a silent breakfast, just like every other morning. But now, every word Emily said seemed to carry a hidden weight. Jason watched her with new eyes, noticing every little detail, the way she fiddled with her phone, the furtive smiles she gave to the screen. He knew that if he wanted answers, he'd have to be patient and play her game. What Jason didn't know was that Emily was already hiding much more than he could have ever imagined. The following days were filled with absolute tension for Jason. He felt like a stranger in his own home, watching Emily's every move, waiting for her to slip up, for some clue that would confirm what he already knew in his heart. Living with her became increasingly difficult. Every smile she gave him, every sweet word, felt loaded with falsehood, as if she were hiding everything that was really happening behind a facade. That afternoon, while Emily was in the shower, Jason gathered the courage to do something he had always sworn he would never do. He picked up her phone from the living room table. His hands trembled as he unlocked the screen. His heart was racing, as if he were about to cross a dangerous line, but it was too late to turn back. He scrolled through her list of messages, and there it was, a contact with no name, just a number, with a recent string of conversations. The messages started innocently enough, but as Jason scrolled further, the tone shifted drastically. They were exchanges filled with intimacy, with details that made his stomach churn. "I can't wait to see you again. He has no clue. This afternoon, next door. Same time." Jason's body went cold. They had been using the house next door, the one he was renovating, for their meetings. Each detail in these conversations felt like a blow. His hands steadied as the anger now kept him grounded. The betrayal was much deeper than he imagined, and the lie was staring him in the face. As he was still processing those messages, he heard the sound of the water turning off in the shower. Panic gripped him for a second. He quickly locked the phone and placed it back exactly where he'd found it, trying to act as if nothing had happened. His heart pounded so hard that he feared Emily might hear it. She entered the living room a few minutes later, smiling, her hair still damp and wrapped in a bathrobe. "Jason, do you want to eat out today? I thought we could go to that restaurant you like," she said casually, as if nothing was wrong, as if everything was still perfect between them. Jason felt a knot in his throat. He wanted to scream, to confront her, but he knew now wasn't the time. He needed more than just those messages to catch Emily and her lover off guard. He needed concrete evidence, something irrefutable. "You know, I think I'll stay home today," Jason replied, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I'm tired, and I think I could use some rest." "Are you okay? You've been quiet these past few days," Emily said, her expression almost concerned. Jason forced a smile. "I'm just tired. Nothing to worry about." Emily watched him for a few seconds, as if trying to read him, but then she looked away, picking up her phone. "I'm going out for a bit then. If you want, I can bring something back for dinner." Jason nodded, unable to continue the conversation. He needed time to think, and Emily's mere presence made it harder. A few minutes later, Emily left the house, leaving Jason alone with his thoughts. He watched from the window as she got into her car and drove off. Once her car disappeared around the corner, he knew what he had to do. He grabbed his own phone and quickly sent a message to Alex. "I need cameras." Alex's response came almost instantly. "Meet you in half an hour." Half an hour later, Alex appeared at Jason's door, carrying a small black box. Inside were several hidden cameras, the kind of equipment Jason never thought he'd need. But it was necessary now. He needed to catch Emily and her lover in the act. "Are you sure about this, Jason?" Alex asked as he discreetly installed the cameras around the empty house next door. "These things are hard to watch once you know the truth." Jason didn't respond immediately. He just watched Alex work, his mind still boiling with the anger he tried to keep under control. "I need to see for myself, Alex. I need proof," Jason finally replied, his voice low and firm. Alex finished installing the last camera and turned to Jason. "All right. Now we wait." That night, Jason stayed up, staring at his phone screen, waiting for any movement. The cameras were connected to an app that would alert him of any activity, and he knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. The clock read just past midnight when his phone vibrated. A movement alert. Jason gripped his phone tightly, his eyes widening as he watched the video feed unfold on the screen. There was Emily, sneaking into the house next door, and soon after, the man he had seen in her arms before. The betrayal this time was undeniable. And now, Jason had everything documented. The anger burned within him like a fire ready to rage out of control. He knew the confrontation was coming. Part 5/10. Jason watched the scene unfold in real time, the crisp image on the screen showing Emily and her lover, the man he still didn't know, entering the house next door. The blood in Jason's veins boiled. His heart felt like it was about to burst from his chest. He had the proof he needed, but that didn't ease the pain. If anything, it made everything more real. He watched as the man closed the door, and soon, both of them disappeared from the camera in the hallway. Jason gripped his phone so tightly his fingers hurt. He knew he couldn't just storm into the house and confront them right now. He had to keep control. But how much longer could he hold out? Leaving the phone on the table, Jason began pacing the room, his mind in turmoil. He wanted to act, to confront them immediately, but something inside held him back. It wasn't just rage, it was a deep pain, the feeling of being betrayed by the person he loved most. How could Emily have done this? After all their years together, after all the promises, how could she have lied so easily? He grabbed his phone and called Alex, the only person he trusted to help him through this. "Jason," Alex answered, his voice deep and cautious. "Did you see something?" "They're in there right now," Jason said, his voice strained with pent-up emotion. "They just went in." I don't know what to do, Alex." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Alex spoke again. "Listen, Jason, you've got the proof. Now it's about how you want to handle this. I know you're angry, but don't let that drive you to make a mistake. We can figure out something together, but take it slow." Jason took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Alex's words. He knew his friend was right, but every passing minute made the desire to end this, to face them both, burn hotter inside him. "I'll hold off for now," Jason said, his voice sounding firm but with the anger still simmering underneath. "I'm here if you need me. You know where to find me," Alex replied before hanging up. Jason continued pacing through the house, unable to sit still. He tried to process his emotions, but the anguish was overwhelming. He felt powerless, like his life was spiraling out of control and he couldn't stop it. And maybe it was. Emily and her lover had taken control of the narrative, while Jason was left waiting in the wings. Hours passed before Jason's phone vibrated again with another motion alert. He jumped up and grabbed the phone. On the screen, Emily and the man were leaving the house. They were smiling, as if nothing in the world mattered, as if Jason was just some disposable obstacle. He stood frozen, watching them leave and disappear into the darkness of the night. The mixture of pain and rage was unbearable. They returned to his house as though everything was perfectly normal. As though he didn't know anything. Emily entered the house sometime later, smiling as she walked through the door, as if it had been a completely ordinary day. Jason, still sitting on the couch, watched as she walked past, a casual smile on her lips as she acted like nothing was wrong. "Hey, love. Feeling better? You seemed a bit tired today," Emily said as she made her way to the kitchen. Jason stared at her, struggling to maintain his composure. How could she act with such ease, knowing what she had done? Her face was serene, her voice carried the same sweetness as always. He felt a lump form in his throat. Part of him wanted to explode right there, confront her, but he knew he had to be smarter. It wasn't going to happen now. "Yeah, I'm feeling better," he replied, trying to mask the tension growing in his voice. Emily smiled and began talking about her day, mentioning trivial things as though she were maintaining a casual, loving conversation with her husband. Jason pretended to listen, but his mind was racing. He analyzed every gesture, every sentence. It all seemed like a lie. His life, his wife, everything felt like a cruel, twisted act, and he was the unwilling audience. After a few minutes of conversation, Emily said she was going to take a shower. Jason watched her disappear down the hallway, and as soon as he heard the bathroom door close, something inside him finally snapped. He knew he couldn't take much more of this. Every time she smiled, every time she pretended, the anger inside him grew stronger. But before he acted, he needed a definitive plan. Jason picked up his phone again and started reviewing the footage, replaying the moments they spent together. Every frame, every laugh, every touch Emily shared with the man made his blood boil. But as he watched, something caught his attention. Something he hadn't noticed before. At one point, Emily's lover took out his phone and made a quick call, his expression turning serious. Jason paused the video and zoomed in on the screen. He managed to capture part of the conversation, just enough to understand that the man wasn't there just for pleasure. There was something more. "Yes, we need to get rid of this fast. I can't afford to get caught." The words echoed in Jason's head. Suddenly, Emily's affair seemed like just the tip of a much larger iceberg. Who was this man? What were they planning? Jason realized he wasn't just dealing with infidelity. Something darker was at play, and he needed to find out before it was too late. Determined to see this through, Jason knew the next move would have to be his. Jason stood still for a few minutes, processing what he had just seen. Emily's betrayal was devastating, but now there was something much more serious at stake. That mysterious man, her lover, wasn't just having an affair with her. He was involved in something shady, something dangerous. And Emily was caught up in the middle of it. What were they trying to hide? Jason needed to find out quickly before he became another victim in a scheme he barely understood. Determined, Jason grabbed his phone again and sent an urgent message to Alex. This goes beyond an affair. Something's wrong with this guy. They're planning something big. Seconds later, Alex replied, I'm coming over. Don't do anything until I get there. Jason took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Every second felt like an eternity, and the house, which had once been his refuge, now felt suffocating. Emily was still in the shower, completely unaware that her lies were starting to unravel. Jason didn't want to act without Alex. He knew he needed a clear head and an ally to face this mess. But the anger, suspicion, and urgency were gnawing at him from the inside. Minutes later, Alex arrived at Jason's house, slipping in through the back door as they had arranged. Jason led him straight to the office, where they could talk without Emily overhearing. The atmosphere was heavy with tension, the weight of what was happening pressing down on both of them. Jason, what did you find? Alex asked, sitting down in a chair across from the desk, his expression grave. Jason pulled up the video on his phone and showed the part where Emily's lover made the call. Alex watched closely, his eyes narrowing as he listened to the words indicating something more sinister than just a simple affair. Yes, we need to get rid of this fast. I can't afford to get caught. Alex shook his head, clearly thinking, and then looked at Jason. This guy isn't just her lover. He's into something dirty. And Emily, whether she knows it or not, is involved, Alex said, his tone cautious but serious. We need to find out who he is, what he does. This could be way bigger than we thought. Jason felt his stomach turn. He had wanted to believe the affair was the worst thing that could happen, but now he realized the situation was far more dangerous. He leaned forward in his chair, rubbing his temples, trying to push away the pounding headache that was starting to form. I thought it was just the affair, but now, Alex, I don't know what to do. Who is this guy? And why is Emily wrapped up in this? Jason asked, looking to his friend for answers, desperate for a way out of the nightmare his life had become. We have a few options, Alex replied, always practical. We could try following this guy, find out where he goes and who he meets. Or, we could try confronting Emily directly and see how much she's involved. But if they're tied up in something illegal, you need to be prepared for that. This isn't just about your marriage anymore. Jason closed his eyes for a moment, trying to calm himself. He had wanted to confront Emily ever since he found out about the affair. But now, with everything at stake, he knew he needed to be more strategic. Let's follow him, Jason decided, opening his eyes. If we find out who he is and what he's doing, I can confront Emily with the whole truth. She won't be able to deny it when I know everything. Alex nodded. All right, we'll go with that. But, Jason, be careful. These kinds of situations can get dangerous fast. That night, Jason and Alex began to formulate a plan. They knew Emily's lover would return to the house next door, and when he did, they'd be ready to follow him. Alex, with his background in investigations, would be able to track the man without being noticed. In the days that followed, Jason pretended as if everything was normal. He woke up, had breakfast with Emily, and even went to work as if nothing had changed. But inside, every smile from Emily, every touch, felt like a dagger. She was living a double life, lying to him, and now Jason knew it wasn't just about the affair, it was something much bigger. Finally, the moment they had been waiting for arrived. On a Thursday afternoon, the man appeared again, sneaking into the house next door. Jason, watching from the cameras, saw everything unfold just as it had before, but this time, he was ready. As soon as the man left the house, Jason and Alex were already prepared, waiting in the car. Alex, experienced and careful, kept a safe distance as they followed the man's car, ensuring they wouldn't raise suspicion. Jason, sitting in the passenger seat, watched every move, trying to suppress the growing rage within him. The man drove for about 20 minutes to an isolated location, an industrial area on the outskirts of Louisville, full of warehouses and abandoned buildings. Alex parked the car at a safe distance, and the two of them sat in silence, observing. The man got out of his car and entered one of the warehouses, which seemed to be operational despite its rundown appearance. Jason and Alex exchanged glances. Something was definitely wrong. "We need to find out what's going on in there," Jason murmured, his sense of danger heightening. Alex nodded, but before they could decide on their next move, something caught their attention. Other men began to appear, entering the warehouse, and soon the place was bustling with suspicious activity. Alex pulled out a long-range camera and discreetly started taking pictures. "This doesn't look small, Jason. Whatever this is, it's big. And dangerous," Alex said, not taking his eyes off the camera. Jason watched everything, the adrenaline surging through his body. He knew they were getting pulled into something much bigger than just a marital affair. Emily was involved with dangerous people, and now, so was he, without even understanding how deep this went. Alex lowered the camera and looked at Jason seriously. "We know where he's involved now. But the question is, what are you going to do with this information?" Jason didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear, he couldn't back down anymore. The air inside the car was thick with tension as Jason and Alex sat in silence, staring at the warehouse where Emily's lover, Greg, had entered. The building was alive with suspicious activity. Men coming and going, loading and unloading boxes into trucks. It was clear now, this wasn't just a simple affair. Something far darker was happening. Jason's stomach churned. For all his anger at Emily, the thought that she could be involved in something like this terrified him. But how much did she know? Was she a willing participant, or had she been manipulated into this? Every new question seemed to pull Jason deeper into a world he never imagined he'd be caught up in. Alex, sitting beside him, watched the scene with the calm precision of someone used to handling dangerous situations. But even he knew this was different. He glanced at Jason, who was gripping the edge of his seat, his knuckles white with tension. "Jason, we need to be very careful from here on out," Alex began, his voice measured. "These guys aren't playing around. Whatever's going on in there, it's serious. We need to gather more information before making any moves." Jason nodded, barely able to tear his eyes away from the warehouse. "I know, but it's driving me crazy. I need to know how deep Emily is in this. What did she get herself into?" Alex paused, looking at his friend with sympathy. Sometimes people get involved in things they can't control. Maybe she got caught up before she even realized what was happening. But either way, you need to prepare for the possibility that she knew more than you want to believe. Jason clenched his jaw. He hated the idea that Emily might have been a willing participant, that she wasn't just an innocent victim caught up in Greg's dangerous world. But as much as he wanted to believe the best in her, he couldn't ignore the facts any longer. "So, what do we do now?" Jason asked, looking to Alex for a plan, something concrete to hold on to as everything around him fell apart. Alex checked his watch and then the warehouse again. "We're not going to rush this. We'll keep an eye on this place, monitor what Greg's doing. I'll plant a tracker on his car, and we'll figure out where he's going next. But Jason, if they're involved in something criminal, we need to be smart. Once we know more, we can confront Emily, but not until we have everything." Jason nodded, his mind racing with everything they'd discovered so far. He couldn't act impulsively, no matter how much his anger urged him to. He had to think long-term now. Back at the house, Jason entered in silence. Emily was sitting on the couch, casually scrolling through her phone, probably texting Greg or organizing her next secret meeting. The sight of her, so relaxed and unaware of what was about to crash down on her, made Jason's blood boil. "Hey, love," she said, looking up from her phone with a smile. "How was your day?" Jason forced a smile, feeling the tension in every muscle of his body. "Busy. Tired. Well, I ordered some takeout. Thought we could relax tonight," Emily said, oblivious to the storm brewing inside Jason's mind. Jason nodded, his eyes studying her closely. Every word she said, every gesture she made, felt like a lie now. He wanted to confront her, to shout and demand answers, but Alex's voice of reason echoed in his mind. He had to wait. He needed more information before he made his move. The next few days passed in agonizing silence. Jason continued to play the role of the unsuspecting husband, but inside, he was unraveling. Every time Emily left the house, every time she smiled at her phone, Jason's anger simmered just beneath the surface. But soon, the breakthrough they were waiting for came. Alex had successfully placed a tracker on Greg's car, and after monitoring his movements for several days, they found a strange pattern. Every few days, Greg made a trip to a remote cabin in the mountains, far from the city. It wasn't on any of his typical routes, and it didn't seem to be connected to his other activities. "This place, it's important," Jason said as they stared at the map, pinpointing the location of the cabin. Alex agreed. "It's off the grid. Whatever he's doing there, it's not part of his usual operations. It could be where they're hiding the weapons, or maybe something more valuable." Jason knew that was the next step. Whatever was happening at that cabin, it was key to finding out what Greg and Emily were really involved in. It was time to confront the truth, no matter how painful it would be. That night, Jason barely slept. His mind was racing, torn between anger and fear of what he might discover. Every time he looked at Emily, he wondered how much she had lied to him, how much she had been hiding. Tomorrow, when they went to the cabin, he would finally have his answers. But he feared that the truth might destroy everything. Early the next morning, Jason and Alex set out for the mountains. The drive was long and tense, the car filled with a heavy silence as they ascended into the secluded, wooded area where Greg's cabin was located. Jason's hands tightened around the steering wheel, his stomach in knots. He knew today would change everything. Finally, after hours of driving, they arrived at a hidden spot near the cabin, parking at a distance where they wouldn't be seen. The cabin sat nestled among the trees, its windows dark and foreboding. Greg's car was parked outside, along with a few other vehicles. Jason's heart raced. This was it. "We need to be careful," Alex said, his voice low as they crouched behind the trees. "We don't know how many people are in there or what they're armed with." Jason nodded, but his mind was already spinning. He wasn't just here to find out what Greg was up to. He was here to get the answers about Emily. He needed to know how deep her betrayal went. And today, he would finally find out. They crept closer to the cabin, moving silently through the trees. As they got nearer, they saw several men milling around, unloading more boxes from trucks, just like at the warehouse. But these weren't ordinary shipments. Jason's gut told him these boxes contained the weapons they had seen before. "This is definitely the hub for something bigger," Alex whispered, pulling out his long-range camera to capture the scene. Jason was about to reply when he saw something that made his blood run cold. Through one of the cabin windows, he caught a glimpse of Greg, and next to him was Emily. Jason's heart stopped. The night was cold and still as Jason and Alex drove toward the mountains, the headlights of their car slicing through the darkness of the deserted road. The tension inside the vehicle was palpable. They were heading to the remote cabin that Greg had been visiting, a place hidden deep in the woods, far from the city. The weight of the truth that Jason was about to uncover pressed down on him like a leaden blanket. Jason gripped the steering wheel tightly, his stomach twisting in knots. He had been prepared for the worst, but the thought of what he might discover at that cabin terrified him. Was Emily a pawn in Greg's criminal scheme, or was she an active participant in whatever illegal operation he was running? Jason's heart raced with every passing mile, knowing that this night could change everything. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Alex asked, breaking the heavy silence as he glanced at Jason, who hadn't said a word in the last half hour. Jason hesitated for a moment, his mind filled with doubt and fear. "Yes. I need to know the truth. I can't keep living in the dark, wondering what's really going on." Alex nodded, respecting Jason's resolve. "All right. Once we get there, we need to be cautious. We don't know what we're walking into. It could just be Greg, but if he's involved in something big, there could be more people." Jason's jaw tightened. He had known from the start that this was more than just an affair, but every new piece of information had taken him further down a path he never expected. Now, he was on the verge of confronting the truth, no matter how dark it might be. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached the outskirts of the cabin. Alex parked the car a safe distance away, hidden behind a dense patch of trees. The cabin stood alone in a clearing, its silhouette dark and foreboding against the backdrop of the night. Greg's car was parked outside, along with another vehicle Jason didn't recognize. The presence of the second car only heightened Jason's anxiety. "We'll move in slowly," Alex said, pulling out a pair of binoculars and scanning the area. "Keep low, stay out of sight. We need to figure out who else is here before we make any decisions." Jason followed Alex as they quietly crept through the woods, their footsteps barely audible on the forest floor. His heart pounded in his chest as they got closer to the cabin. The sound of muffled voices drifted from inside, but they couldn't make out any words. Jason's mind was racing, each step bringing him closer to answers, but also closer to a confrontation he wasn't sure he was ready for. When they reached the edge of the clearing, Alex crouched down behind a tree, motioning for Jason to do the same. He handed Jason the binoculars and pointed to a window on the side of the cabin. Jason raised the binoculars to his eyes and peered inside. What he saw made his heart stop. Through the window, Jason saw Greg standing in the middle of the room, talking to a group of men. But that wasn't what made Jason freeze in shock, it was who was standing next to Greg. Emily. Jason's blood ran cold. There she was, his wife, standing casually beside Greg, listening intently as he spoke to the men around him. Her posture wasn't that of someone who had been manipulated or forced into this. She looked calm, composed, as if she belonged there. She didn't seem like a victim. She seemed like a partner. Jason's grip on the binoculars tightened as anger, confusion, and disbelief surged through him. How could she be standing there, involved in something so dangerous, without ever telling him? What else had she hidden from him? "Do you see her?" Alex asked quietly, sensing the change in Jason's demeanor. Jason nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's in there, with him. She looks like she knows exactly what's going on." Alex glanced at Jason, his expression serious. "This doesn't look good, Jason. If she's in there with them, she might be more involved than we thought." Jason lowered the binoculars, his mind spinning. He had always hoped that Emily had been drawn into Greg's world without fully understanding what was happening, but seeing her there, at the heart of it all, made him question everything. "We need to know what they're doing here," Jason said, his voice laced with tension. "I need to hear what they're saying." Alex nodded. "All right, but we have to be careful. Let's move closer to the cabin and see if we can hear anything through the windows." They moved quietly, inching closer to the cabin, their hearts pounding with every step. When they reached the back of the cabin, they crouched beneath a window. Jason could hear Greg's voice now, clearer than before, but it was what he heard next that made his heart race. "We need to move the rest of the weapons tonight," Greg said, his voice firm. "It's getting too risky. If we wait any longer, someone's going to catch on." Jason's blood ran cold. Weapons. Greg wasn't just involved in some minor criminal activity, he was smuggling arms. Jason had suspected something serious, but the confirmation of weapons trafficking hit him like a punch in the gut. Then he heard Emily's voice. "I agree. We can't afford any more delays. We need to finish this and get out before anyone notices." Jason felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. Emily wasn't just standing by Greg's side, she was actively participating in the operation. She wasn't a victim. She was part of it. Jason's hands shook with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He had been prepared for the possibility that Emily was involved, but hearing her so calmly discuss smuggling weapons was more than he could bear. How long had she been lying to him? How much of their life had been a lie? Alex placed a hand on Jason's shoulder, sensing the rage bubbling inside him. "Stay calm, Jason. We need to think this through. You can't confront her like this, not here." Jason closed his eyes, taking deep breaths as he tried to contain the fury threatening to explode. He knew Alex was right. If he stormed in now, things could get violent, dangerous. But it took everything in him not to kick down the door and demand answers from Emily right then and there. After a few moments, Jason regained enough control to think clearly again. "What do we do now?" Alex looked at him, his voice low and steady. "We gather more evidence. We need proof of what's going on here, something that the police can use. This is bigger than just Greg and Emily. They're moving weapons, Jason. That's serious. Jason nodded, his mind still spinning. And Emily? Alex paused. You're going to have to confront her eventually, but not tonight. We need more information before you can do that. Jason knew Alex was right, but every second that passed made it harder to keep his emotions in check. He couldn't believe the woman he had loved for so many years could be standing there, involved in something so dangerous and illegal. As they crept back toward the safety of the woods, Jason's mind was consumed by a single thought. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about survival. Emily was involved in something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined, and now, Jason had to decide how far he was willing to go to uncover the truth. Time seemed to slow as Jason crouched behind the trees, his heart pounding in his chest. The image of Emily calmly standing beside Greg, discussing the movement of weapons, burned into his mind. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was criminal. Emily, his wife, was deeply involved in something dangerous, something illegal, and Jason was now caught in the middle of it. Alex glanced at Jason, seeing the turmoil on his face. We can't stay here much longer. They'll be moving soon. If we push our luck, we might get caught. Jason nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He was struggling to reconcile the woman he had married with the person he had just seen inside the cabin. Emily had lied to him for months, maybe years. And it wasn't just the affair. It was much worse. She was working with Greg, helping him smuggle weapons, putting both of their lives at risk. We need to get out of here, Alex said, nudging Jason's arm. Let's fall back and regroup. We'll figure out our next move once we're safe. Jason stood up, his legs stiff from crouching for so long. Every part of him wanted to charge into that cabin and demand answers, but he knew that wasn't an option. Not yet. If he confronted Emily now, things could spiral out of control, and they were in dangerous territory. He had to think strategically, just as Alex had warned him. They slipped back into the woods, careful to remain hidden as they retreated toward their car. The sound of muffled voices faded as they moved farther away, the dark outline of the cabin eventually disappearing from view. Jason's mind was still racing, replaying every word he'd heard, every expression on Emily's face. Back at the car, Alex took out his phone and began scanning the photos he had taken with his long-range camera. We've got enough evidence here to get the police involved, Jason. We've got pictures of Greg, the other men, and those boxes of weapons. This is serious. They won't be able to ignore it. Jason stood silently by the car, his jaw clenched. His thoughts were miles away from the police or the evidence. He was focused on Emily. How could she have done this? How had she hidden something so big for so long? He knew he had to confront her, but how? How could he face her, knowing what she had become? Jason, you're not saying much, Alex said quietly, sensing the storm brewing inside his friend. Jason turned to face him, his voice tight with anger. I trusted her, Alex. I never saw this coming. How could I have been so blind? Alex sighed, understanding Jason's pain. People change, man. Sometimes we don't see it until it's too late. But right now, we need to think about how we're going to handle this. You can't go in there guns blazing. It'll only make things worse. Jason nodded, knowing Alex was right. But every instinct in him was screaming for a confrontation. The lies, the betrayal, and the danger they were in, it was too much to hold inside. But he had to keep control. If he lost it now, he might lose everything. I'll confront her, Jason said finally, his voice steady, though his hands trembled. But not tonight. We'll take the evidence to the police, let them handle Greg and the others. After that, I'll deal with Emily. Alex gave him a firm nod, relieved that Jason was thinking rationally. Good. That's the smart move. Let's get out of here and figure out the next steps. As they drove back to the city, the silence between them was heavy. Jason's mind was consumed by what he had seen and heard. He couldn't shake the image of Emily standing there, not as his wife, but as a woman complicit in something criminal. It felt like he was losing her, piece by piece. Once they returned to Jason's house, Alex parked the car and turned to him. We'll go to the police first thing in the morning. But tonight, try to keep your head on straight. You're going to see Emily, and I know it's going to be tough. Don't do anything reckless. Jason stared out the window at the darkened house. Emily was inside, probably unaware that her world was about to come crashing down. He took a deep breath and nodded. I won't. I'll hold it together. For now. Good, Alex said, clapping him on the shoulder. I'll see you tomorrow morning. We'll finish this. Jason watched as Alex drove off into the night, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He stood outside for a moment, gathering the courage to walk back into his house. The home he had built with Emily now felt like a lie, a facade hiding the ugly truth of who she had become. Inside, Jason found Emily sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand, scrolling through her phone like it was any other evening. She looked up when he entered, smiling at him as if nothing had changed. Hey, you're home late, she said, her tone light and casual. Jason felt his stomach turn. How could she sit there, pretending everything was fine, knowing what she had been doing behind his back? He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. This wasn't the time. He couldn't lose control now. Yeah, just had a long day, Jason replied, his voice tight, masking the storm of emotions inside him. Emily put her phone down and walked over to him, placing a hand on his arm. You okay? You've seemed a little off these past few days. Jason's skin burned under her touch. The hypocrisy of her concern made him want to scream. But he held it together, forcing a smile. I'm fine. Just tired. Emily studied him for a moment, as if trying to read his thoughts, but then she nodded, accepting his answer. Well, I'm going to bed soon. You should get some rest too. Jason watched her as she disappeared down the hallway, his mind a whirlwind of anger and confusion. How long had she been lying to him? How many nights had she come home from these meetings with Greg and acted like everything was normal? When Emily was out of sight, Jason sat down at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. He needed to figure out what to say to her, how to confront her without letting the rage take over. But as he sat there, replaying everything he had seen and heard, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about the affair. Emily had crossed a line, and Jason wasn't sure if there was any way back. The next morning, Jason met up with Alex, and together they went to the police with all the evidence they had gathered. The officers took the photos and recordings seriously, recognizing the gravity of the situation. Greg and his associates were now officially under investigation. But Jason knew his real confrontation still lay ahead. The authorities would take care of Greg, but Emily, she was another story. When he returned home that evening, he knew it was time. He walked through the front door, his heart heavy, and found Emily sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and tense. She looked up at him, and for the first time, Jason saw fear in her eyes. Jason, we need to talk, she said, her voice trembling. Jason closed the door behind him, his mind set. Yes, we do. The silence that filled the room was suffocating. Jason stood by the door, his eyes locked on Emily, who sat at the kitchen table, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. She had always been so composed, but now, for the first time, she seemed nervous, scared even. Jason could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them both. This was the confrontation he had been dreading, but it was inevitable. Emily swallowed hard and looked up at him. Jason, I can explain. Jason's jaw tightened, and he stepped further into the room. His mind raced, trying to control the storm of emotions inside him. Anger, betrayal, confusion, all crashing together. He had rehearsed this moment over and over in his head, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure how to begin. Explain what, Emily? Jason's voice was low, cold. How you've been lying to me. How you've been involved in something criminal behind my back. Or how you've been with Greg while pretending to be my wife. Emily's eyes filled with tears, and she stood, taking a hesitant step toward him. Jason, please. It's not what you think. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Jason shook his head, his anger rising. You didn't mean for it to happen? I've seen everything, Emily. I followed you. I saw you with Greg. I know about the weapons. You're not just cheating on me, you're involved in something dangerous. So don't stand there and tell me you didn't mean for it to happen. Emily's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks as she tried to find the right words. "I didn't want this, Jason. I swear. When I first got involved with Greg, I didn't know what he was really doing. It started with the affair. I made a mistake. But by the time I realized how deep I was in, it was too late. He wouldn't let me leave. He threatened me, Jason." Jason clenched his fists, trying to contain his fury. He wanted to believe her, wanted to think that maybe she had been manipulated, trapped. But the memory of her standing beside Greg in that cabin, calm and composed, made him doubt everything she said. "And you didn't think to come to me? You didn't think you could trust me with the truth?" Jason's voice was thick with emotion. "Instead, you kept lying, kept working with him. How long, Emily? How long were you going to keep this from me?" Emily wiped her tears, her voice trembling. "I was scared, Jason. I thought if I told you, you'd get hurt. Greg has connections. He's dangerous. I didn't want to pull you into it." Jason's rage flared. "Don't you see? You did pull me into it. Every lie you told, every time you went to him, you pulled me deeper into this mess. And now the police are involved. They're coming for Greg, and they're coming for you too." Emily's eyes widened in shock. "The police? Jason, what did you do?" "I did what you should have done a long time ago," Jason snapped. "I reported everything. They know about Greg's smuggling operation, the weapons, everything. It's over, Emily." Emily's face drained of color as the reality of the situation sank in. She collapsed into a chair, her hands shaking as she buried her face in them. "Oh my God. I didn't think it would go this far. I never wanted this." Jason felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. He had spent so much energy being angry, being betrayed, but now all he felt was an overwhelming sense of sadness. The woman he had loved for so many years, the life they had built together, it was all crumbling before his eyes. "What did you want, Emily?" Jason asked softly. "What was the plan? Were you just going to keep lying until everything fell apart? Until you were caught?" Emily looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "I don't know. I was so scared, Jason. Every time I thought about telling you, I froze. I didn't know how to get out. And Greg, he made it clear that I couldn't just walk away." Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair. He wanted to believe her, wanted to think that maybe she had just been trapped by fear, but the damage was already done. "Emily, you could have come to me. I would have done anything to help you. But now, I don't even know who you are anymore." Emily's tears started again, but Jason didn't feel the sympathy he once would have. His heart was numb. "What happens now?" Emily asked in a broken voice. Jason looked at her for a long moment, the weight of the years they had spent together heavy on his shoulders. "Now? You face the consequences. The police are already investigating, and they'll come for Greg soon. You'll have to answer for your part in this." Emily nodded, her face pale and defeated. "And us? What happens to us?" Jason felt a lump form in his throat. Us. The word felt foreign now, like it no longer applied. How could there still be an us after everything that had happened? "I don't know," Jason said honestly. "I need time. I need to figure out what's left of this marriage, if there's anything left at all." Emily nodded again, her face crumpling as fresh sobs racked her body. Jason watched her for a moment, feeling both pity and anger. He had loved her once, deeply. But now, standing here in the wreckage of their lives, he wasn't sure if he could ever love her again. "I'm going to stay at a hotel for a few days," Jason said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I need to clear my head." Emily didn't try to stop him. She just nodded, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Jason turned and walked toward the door, his heart heavy with the weight of everything he had lost. As he stepped outside into the cold night, he felt a strange sense of relief. It was over, the lies, the betrayal, the fear. He didn't know what the future held, but at least now he knew the truth. And maybe, with time, he could find a way to move forward, to rebuild his life, to heal. But for now, all he could do was walk away from the ruins of what he once thought was his forever.